Hey everybody, it's Tyler Austin. Thank you so much for watching. I'm going to kind of make a different video today, and I'm going to talk about the future of small arms development and technology, or at least in my opinion, what I think the future holds. Now, obviously, I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't tell for sure what's going to come down the pipeline in the upcoming decades. However, I think I'm in a position to make a fairly educated guess, if you will, on what I think the future ultimately holds. Now, right off the bat, I'm going to say something that's going to give me a lot of haters. I can already hear the comments, the mean comments down below talking about how stupid I am or whatever. But ultimately, I think in the coming decades, the majority of rifles, now I'm going to be talking specifically military rifles here, military rifles used for serious duty purposes, military use, self-defense, etc., etc. Not necessarily talking about like sporting arms or whatever. I'm talking about serious use rifles, or really just firearms in general, actually, and military use firearms. So I think ultimately what you're going to see is bullpup designs. I think the majority of military designs are going to be coming out in the upcoming decades are going to be bullpups. Now, again, I can already hear all the bullpup haters down in the comments below, doing their autistic screeching on why bullpups suck and blah 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 blah. But ultimately, I do think bullpups are the future. Why is that? Well, there's a few different reasons. Number one, right now, everybody wants short, compact rifles, but at the same time, they want optimum terminal ballistics. So right now, you don't get that out of conventional rifles. You just don't. I'm sorry, it's a trade-off when it comes to conventional rifles. It's a trade-off between short and compact and optimal, ballistic performance. It just is, especially if that rifle is chambered in a round such as 5.56 that really demands barrel length in order to have good ballistics. It's just the way it is. Now, obviously, there are some cartridges that do better out of shorter barrels, like 300 Blackout or whatever. But still, even with those rounds like 300 Blackout, you're still going to get better performance out of a 16-inch barrel than you are out of like a 12.5 or certainly like a 10.5. Just the way it is. So everybody wants a short, compact rifle, but at the same time, they want, good terminal ballistics, and you do not get that out of conventional rifles, at least currently, especially with rounds such as 5.56. However, with bullpups, you do get that. You can, like, for example, a Tavor. Now, obviously, it's going to depend slightly on, the design of the bullpup or whatever. But we'll just take the most common one, a Tavor. A Tavor with a 16.5-inch barrel is almost exactly the same length as a Mark 18 with a whatever it is, like a 10.5-inch barrel, right? It's almost exactly the same length. So not only do you get short and compact, but you also get, because you maintain that barrel length, you get better ballistic performance. And that is ultimately why I think bullpups are going to become the future, especially when militaries start looking at how they would perform against other conventional militaries that are generally on par with them, i.e., like the United States versus China, Russia, whatever. Because the majority of these of modern militaries are utilizing body armor, and you need primarily velocity in order to defeat body armor, and you also need a good amount of mass behind that projectile. And unfortunately, right now, 5.56 especially, I don't care. I don't care what anyone says. 5.56 sucks ass at defeating body armor. I don't care what kind of round you're using. I don't care what barrel length. Even out of a 20-inch barrel and using AP, 5.56 just sucks balls at defeating body armor. It just does. It doesn't have enough mass to really do so effectively. So what you're going to see is, number one, bullpup designs, because you need that barrel length. And if you go short on a conventional rifle, now you're really, you're chopping down that velocity, and now you're really, really hurting your ability to defeat body armor, and also along with just, general terminal ballistics as well. So you need that velocity. And so ultimately what we're going to see is we're going to upscale the caliber The Army's already looking at doing this. They're looking at 6.8 and whatever. And we're going to swap over to a bullpup design at some point. Again, because you need that heavier caliber and you need that velocity in order to beat body armor. And bullpups allow you to do that while still maintaining a short, compact package. Next, what I think you're going to see are electronic fire control groups. So instead of the all mechanical fire control groups that you see now, Sear releases a hammer strikes a firing pin discharges the primer. That's all going to be replaced with an electronic fire control group, even the primer being discharged. I think what you will see is primers becoming electronic primers, so I either discharge via an electronic pulse or electric pulse rather than kinetically discharged via like a striker or a firing pin. I think that's going to also be the future. There are a lot of advantages to a electronic fire control group. Number one being it actually simplifies things because you don't have all the mechanisms and the triggers and the reset. You don't have any of that. It's just an electric circuit, if you will. So it simplifies things, makes things more reliable. Also, because it's not mechanical, you have freedom to do a lot of things that you couldn't do with a conventional mechanical fire control group. Like you could set the trigger weight. The triggers will be very, very smooth because again they're not mechanical anymore. So I mean they'll be as smooth as butter, smoother than any mechanical trigger could ever be. You can adjust their weight. There's just a lot of advantages to a electronic fire control group on that end, but also what you're going to see is for like squad automatic weapons, because it's electronically controlled, you have the freedom to like set fire rates. So you could set the fire rate as low as you want it or need it, or as high up until you could set as high as the cyclic rate of the weapon itself. So in terms of just being user friendly, electronic fire control groups are definitely going to be the future. We're already starting to kind of see this. I mean, a lot of the Olympic competitive those competitive rifles used in the Olympics, the 22 rifles, a lot of those actually have electronic sears, if you will. They're still hammer fired because they use 22s, but the sear is actually released electronically, so it makes for a very, 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 very nice trigger. But yeah, so I think that's ultimately what's going to happen. Now I can already hear, and these are valid questions. Is it going to be waterproof? Of course, it would have to be waterproof. Battery life in terms of how many shots you can get, that's actually not really a big deal, because if you replace a fire control group with like even decently sized lithium battery, I mean you could get literally thousands of shots, tens of thousands potentially, before the battery would have to be charged, because it doesn't take a very large electric pulse to discharge a primer. So you could literally get thousands, if not tens of thousands, of shots on any decent sized lithium battery. So yeah, I mean, obviously it'd be like waterproof and all that, and we have the technology to do that now. Any good team of electric engineers could figure out how to do that. I can already hear the diabetic emergencies that are going on right now between all those people who are, preppers, quote unquote, but they're like 450 pounds overweight. I can already hear the diabetic screeching of, but my EMP, what about an EMP? Because as if the biggest thing those people have to worry about is if an EMP hit the United States, whether or not their rifle worked. I think your biggest issue is where you're going to be getting your insulin and your hypertension medication. But obviously, joking aside, it would obviously be EMP proof, for obvious reasons, particularly if it's a military rifle, obviously. But again, I think though that is the future for all the benefits that it will have. Electronic fire control groups. Moving on, telescoped casing. So if you don't know what a telescoped casing is, it's basically it's a casing in which the projectile is inset into the casing itself. So if you think of a conventional bullet, if you will, conventional cartridge, the bullet sits on top of the casing. Obviously, it's inset slightly in to hold it, but it sits on top of the casing. A telescoped casing is where that bullet is actually sitting inside the casing itself. Think of like a shotgun shell. A shotgun shell is essentially a telescoped casing, if you will. Think of like a slug, right? It's sitting inside of the shell. And I think that's ultimately going to be the future. Those have a lot of advantages to them. And I think they'll also be polymer, because there's a lot of advantages to polymer casings. Lots of advantages I'm not going to go into here, but ultimately I think that will be the future. Is you'll see, particularly rifle rounds, they're going to be telescoped. Now this technology has been around for a while. It's nothing necessarily new. Polymer cased telescoped ammunition. Eugene Stoner even seriously experimented with it. I mean, he developed telescope casings, even like plastic ones. So he played around with it seriously. Obviously, he never really got anything off the ground in terms of like military use or even civilian use, obviously. But he definitely played around with it. So this technology has been around for a while. And with the advent of modern polymers and all that, it's definitely on its way here. I mean, we already see it. One of the new or proposed saws that are coming to the Army, that are being tested by the Army, is actually using telescoped casings, and it seems to work really, really well. So I believe that it definitely is the future for all the advantages that it has. There's a lot of advantages to it. Look it up. I'm not going to dive too deep into it here, but there's a lot of advantages to not only plastic casings, but telescoped casings as well. And then finally, this isn't really like, in terms of like the firearm itself, it's going to be more of the optics, but optics and firearms go hand in hand. But I think what you'll see is passive optics. And what I mean by that is, instead of an optic that you have to look through. So think of all the optics nowadays that we have, red dots, powered optics, whatever. You actually have to look through the lens, if you will, find the sight. So you actively have to look through the sight in order to aim with it. What you're going to see is, in my opinion, is down the road. Now this is probably several decades down the road, to be fair, but ultimately I think we'll likely start seeing this, at least in my lifetime, is you'll have an optic on top of a rifle or even pistol that is connected to either a visor that's on your helmet, or even like a monocular or monocular, no, monocle, yeah, monocle, if you will, and that sight displays a reticle either on that visor or that monocle. So wherever that rifle is pointed, wherever that barrel is pointed, it basically will display a reticle on either your visor or that monocle. So yeah, I think that's going to be the future. Kind of think of like what you see in, I guess you could say like video games, some video games nowadays. That's kind of what I think that will ultimately become the future of optics. Now, there's a lot of advantages to that, because instead of actually having to look through the sight, your reticle is always there. So one of the biggest problems in terms of like training, particularly like large militaries, is getting people to actually use their sights, believe it or not. So if your sight is always in front of your face, at least if you're pointing your rifle in the general direction of where you're looking, it's going to greatly increase accuracy for especially like general infantry. So I think that's what you'll end up seeing. We're starting to see stuff, really cool stuff with optics now, where they automatically adjust where they'll automatically adjust their holdover or hold unders, where the optic itself has like a range finder, and it will just adjust the range to what you've sighted the rifle in. So, if you sighted the rifle in for like 50 yards or whatever, and now you're aiming at something that's 300 yards away, the rangefinder calculates that and automatically adjusts your reticle to where it needs to be. So automatically adjust the reticle to the proper holdover. We're already starting to see that with optics. I think there are optics that do that already, that are in military trials for the United States. So obviously optics are really coming a long way, but I think ultimately what you'll see is that passive optic, if you will, where the optic is doing the aiming, if you will, and just displays a reticle on your visor or on a monocle or whatever that's in front of your face. I think that's ultimately going to be the future. Now, that will probably be several decades away, but I do think ultimately that's the future. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video helpful, informative, and entertaining. If you did, be sure to like, subscribe, or follow depending on where you're watching this. You can follow me on Instagram at Tyler_MidgardStrength, and I am also on Zion. My 2 community pages are Midgard Strength and Conditioning and Gungnir Strategic. You can scan their respective codes here or search for them on the community search page. If you like my strength and conditioning content, check out my podcast, the Classical Strength Podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. Finally, if you would like to become stronger and healthier than you've ever been in your life, consider hiring me as your coach. I offer the most effective and personalized online coaching in the industry. So if that's something that would interest you, visit my website, midgardstrength.com, or you can email me directly at tyler@midgardstrength.com. Thanks for watching.